A boy looks up in the middle of a courtroom surrounded by tension and says something no one expected. "You're my daddy." The judge's face freezes, his gavel trembling in his hand, before he makes a shocking decision, locking the doors to the courtroom. What's hidden in this moment? What secrets could make a man halt justice itself? As whispers echo through the room, the truth starts to unravel. A truth that's been buried for years. Why did the judge react this way? And what will happen when this revelation threatens to destroy everything? The answers will leave you stunned. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Judge Thomas Langston's courtroom had always been a place of perfect order. On this autumn morning, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. The judge sat straight-backed in his high-backed leather chair, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, his black robes pristine. At 62, he carried himself with the weight of decades of legal experience. The custody case before him seemed routine enough. Rachel Carter, a petite woman with kind eyes and auburn hair, stood at one table, her attorney beside her. Her ex-husband, James Mitchell, a man with sharp features and an expensive suit, occupied the other table with his legal team. The air crackled with tension. "Your Honor," Rachel's attorney began, "my client has been Leo's primary caregiver since birth. Mr. Mitchell's allegations of neglect are completely unfounded." Thomas listened intently, his expression neutral as he had done countless times before. His eyes drifted to the small boy seated in the front row, Leo Carter, age 5, with unruly brown hair and bright eyes that seemed oddly familiar. The proceedings continued with their usual formality until James Mitchell's attorney began listing grievances. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Ms. Carter has repeatedly refused to disclose the identity of the child's biological father, raising serious questions about, 'You're my daddy!'" The high-pitched voice cut through the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Leo had jumped to his feet, pointing directly at Judge Langston. His small finger remained unwavering, his eyes wide with certainty. The courtroom froze. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the boy. In that moment, he saw what everyone else must have already noticed. The same square jaw, the same deep-set eyes, the same determined expression he saw every morning in his mirror. Rachel Carter had gone pale, her hands gripping the table before her. James Mitchell's face had turned an ugly shade of red, his attorney looking between his client and the judge with growing alarm. "Bailiff," Thomas managed, his voice barely steady, "lock the doors. Clear the courtroom except for Ms. Carter, Mr. Mitchell, their attorneys, and—" He swallowed hard. The child. As the spectators filed out in stunned silence, Thomas fought to maintain his composure. The weight of his robe suddenly felt suffocating. 5 years ago. He remembered now. Rachel had been a law clerk, temporary assignment. Their brief relationship had ended when she took a position in another city. He had never known. "Ms. Carter," he said once the doors were locked, his voice hoarse. "I believe we need to discuss this privately in my chambers." "This is outrageous," James Mitchell exploded, standing up. "You can't possibly continue to preside over this case. I demand—" "Mr. Mitchell," Thomas cut him off, his judicial authority returning to his voice. "You will sit down. We will address this situation properly and legally." He turned to the court clerk. "Contact the county medical center. We'll need DNA testing arranged immediately." His eyes met Rachel's, seeing years of unspoken words in her tearful gaze. Court is adjourned until further notice. As the bailiff began escorting people out, Thomas couldn't help but look at Leo again. The boy smiled at him, a smile so innocent and sure that it made his heart ache. For the first time in his decades on the bench, Judge Thomas Langston felt his carefully ordered world spinning completely out of control. Thomas sat in his home office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of leather-bound law books and the soft glow of his desk lamp. The evening shadows stretched across his mahogany desk as he thumbed through old case files, searching for Rachel Carter's name among the countless documents. His fingers trembled slightly as he found what he was looking for. Her employment records from 5 years ago. 3 months, he murmured to himself, studying the dates. Just 3 months she worked here. The papers felt heavy in his hands, weighted with unspoken possibilities and missed opportunities. His phone buzzed. Rachel's number. He had given her his private line after the courtroom incident. Taking a deep breath, he answered. "Judge Langston." Rachel's voice was soft, apologetic. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all." He loosened his tie, feeling suddenly confined. "I've been reviewing some old files, actually." "I wanted to explain about Leo," she said. "He's always been curious about his father. The other kids at school talk about their dads, and he dreams about having one. Makes up stories sometimes." Her voice cracked slightly. "When he saw you today, something just clicked for him." Thomas closed his eyes, remembering Leo's unwavering finger pointing at him in the courtroom. "I see the resemblance now," he admitted. "His mannerisms, the way he holds himself." "He sits just like you," Rachel said quietly. "Even folds his arms the same way when he's thinking hard about something." She paused, and Thomas could hear the hesitation in her voice. "I've been trying to make ends meet, but with everything happening." "Everything?" Thomas prompted gently. "Just, life." Rachel deflected, but her voice carried a weight that Thomas couldn't ignore. "Medical bills can pile up faster than you'd expect." After ending the call, Thomas stared at his phone for a long moment before scrolling to another number, Emily's, his daughter. Their last conversation had been months ago, a stilted exchange of holiday pleasantries. He pressed dial before he could change his mind. "Dad?" Emily's voice was guarded, suspicious of this unexpected call. "Emily, He cleared his throat. "I needed to ask you something. About children." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Children," she finally replied, her tone cool. "That's different." "How do you know?" He struggled to find the words. "How do you know if you're doing right by them?" Wow. Emily's laugh was sharp, brittle. "That's quite a question coming from you." Thomas felt the familiar ache of regret. "Emily, I know I wasn't—" "Look, Dad, I have to go," she cut him off. "Mason needs help with his homework." The line went dead, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. He walked to his study window, looking out at the darkening sky. In his mind's eye, he could see Leo in the courtroom, could see his own features reflected in the boy's face. The same serious expression he'd worn in childhood photos, the same determined set of the jaw. The weight of possibility pressed down on him, the chance to be the father he'd failed to be with Emily, the opportunity to right old wrongs. But first, he needed to understand what Rachel wasn't telling him about those medical bills, about the shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hidden worries. The weekend brought an unexpected visit from Rachel and Leo to Thomas's home. As Rachel gently nudged Leo forward in the judge's study, the boy clutched a rolled-up piece of paper to his chest, his eyes wide with wonder at the wall-to-wall bookshelf. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Rachel encouraged, though Thomas noticed how she steadied herself against the doorframe. "Show Judge Langston what you drew." Leo approached Thomas's desk with careful steps, his small fingers unrolling the paper. "I made this in art class," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. The crayon drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. One was clearly meant to be Leo, with spiky brown hair. The tallest figure wore what appeared to be a black robe. "That's you," Leo pointed at the robed figure. "And that's Mommy, and that's me. It's our perfect family." His face lit up with pride and hope. Thomas felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. He cleared his throat. "I used to draw too, when I was your age." "Really?" Leo's eyes sparkled with interest. "Yes," Thomas found himself smiling. "Once I drew my cat as big as our house. My mother hung it on the refrigerator, but my father—" He chuckled at the memory. My father was convinced I'd seen a mountain lion in our backyard and called animal control. Leo's laughter, pure and uninhibited, filled the study. The sound made Thomas's chest tight with an unfamiliar warmth. Rachel smiled from the doorway, but Thomas noticed her grip on the frame tighten, her knuckles white. Before he could inquire about her well-being, the doorbell rang. Moments later, Emily's voice echoed through the house. "Dad, your door was unlocked and I thought we should—" She appeared in the study doorway, stopping short at the sight before her. Her professional attire and rigid posture contrasted sharply with the informal family scene. "Emily," Thomas stood quickly, knocking over his penholder. "I wasn't expecting—" "Clearly," she said, her eyes moving from Rachel to Leo, then back to her father. 20 years of missing my school plays and piano recitals, but here you are, playing happy families." "Who are you?" Leo asked innocently, breaking the tension. Emily's expression softened slightly as she looked at the boy. "I'm Emily. Judge Langston is my father." "You're my sister?" Leo's face lit up with excitement. He rushed to her, waving his drawing. "Look, I drew our family. Do you want to be in it too?" Emily's carefully constructed anger wavered. She knelt down to Leo's level, examining the drawing. "That's really good. You know, I used to draw too, but I was terrible at it." "I can teach you," Leo offered enthusiastically. "Judge Langston says he used to draw too. He made a giant cat once." A ghost of a smile crossed Emily's face. "Did he now?" She glanced at her father, who stood awkwardly behind his desk. "That's a story I've never heard?" Rachel swayed slightly in the doorway, pressing a hand to her forehead. Thomas noticed immediately, but she waved off his concern with a weak smile. Leo, absorbed in showing Emily his drawing, didn't notice his mother's pallor or the way she leaned more heavily against the wall. The envelope sat unopened on Thomas's desk for hours. The DNA test results inside held the power to change multiple lives forever. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his study, he finally reached for it with trembling hands. The clinical language of the report couldn't soften the impact of its conclusion. 99.9% probability of paternity. Thomas Langston was indeed Leo's father. He sat back in his leather chair, emotions washing over him in waves. Anger at Rachel for keeping this secret, guilt for all the years he'd missed, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility that threatened to crush him. His ordered world was crumbling around him. The sound of laughter drifted in from the living room, where Emily was helping Leo with an art project. The boy's giggles mixed with his daughter's gentle instructions, creating a harmony that made his chest ache. "Judge Langston?" Rachel's soft voice drew his attention to the doorway. She looked pale, more fragile than he'd ever seen her. "The results came," he said flatly, holding up the paper. "Though I suspect you already knew what they'd say." Rachel nodded, closing the door behind her. She sank into the chair across from his desk, her movements careful and measured. "There's something else you need to know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Something I've been hiding." Thomas leaned forward, noticing the tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sick, Thomas, really sick." Rachel's hands twisted in her lap. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors... She paused, choking back a sob. "They've given me months, maybe weeks." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I couldn't bear to see Leo afraid," Rachel wiped her eyes. "He's so young, so full of joy. I wanted to protect him from this darkness as long as possible, but now..." She looked toward the door, where Leo's laughter still echoed. "Now he needs someone to care for him when I'm gone." From the living room, they heard Leo's voice. "Emily, what makes a real family?" Emily's response was gentle. "Love makes a family, Leo. People who care about each other and look out for one another." "Like Mommy and me?" Leo asked. "Yes, exactly like that. And Judge Langston too? Even though he wasn't here before?" There was a pause before Emily answered. "Sometimes family finds each other later, but that doesn't make it any less real." Thomas felt tears stinging his eyes. He looked at Rachel, seeing both the weight of her illness and the fierce love for their son in her expression. "I know I have no right to ask," Rachel said softly. But Leo needs a father. He needs you, Thomas. Not just legally, but in all the ways that matter. He needs someone to teach him, protect him, love him. Thomas stood up, walking to the window. The responsibility felt enormous, terrifying. He'd failed once with Emily, and the scars of that failure still haunted them both. But as he listened to Leo's innocent questions about family and love, something shifted in his heart. "Will you help him understand?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. "When I'm gone?" The peaceful afternoon shattered when Rachel's ex-husband, Mark, burst through the front door of Thomas's home. His expensive suit and polished appearance couldn't mask the anger in his eyes. "Where's my son?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the hallway. Rachel stepped out of Thomas's study, her face pale but determined. "Leo is not your son, Mark. You know that." Leo peeked around the corner from the living room, his small fingers clutching a crayon drawing. The sight of Mark made him shrink back, pressing himself against the wall. "I've been more of a father to him than anyone else," Mark spat, gesturing wildly. "And now I hear you're sick? You really think you can take care of him like this?" Thomas watched as Leo's lower lip began to tremble. The boy's eyes darted between the adults, confusion and fear evident on his small face. "I have resources," Mark continued, his voice rising. "I can give him stability, the best schools, everything he needs. What can you offer him now, Rachel? A few months of watching you waste away." Rachel flinched as if she'd been slapped. "How dare you?" "Stop!" Thomas's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Mark and Rachel. "You're frightening the child." Leo ran to Thomas, wrapping his arms around the judge's legs and burying his face against them. Without thinking, Thomas placed a protective hand on the boy's head. "This is a private matter," Mark sneered. "It doesn't concern you, Your Honor." "On the contrary," Thomas replied, his judicial demeanor firmly in place. "As Leo's biological father, it very much concerns me." He felt Leo's grip tighten on his legs. "And I will not allow you to traumatize my son with your outbursts." Mark's face reddened. "You can't just sweep in here and—" "My lawyer will be filing for full custody," Mark interrupted, pulling a document from his briefcase. "I suggest you prepare yourself, Rachel. No judge in their right mind would leave a child with a dying mother." Thomas felt something shift inside him, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. "Perhaps you've forgotten who you're speaking to," he said quietly, his tone carrying a weight that made Mark take a step back. "I suggest you leave, now. Any further communication can go through proper legal channels." Mark's jaw clenched, but he backed toward the door. "This isn't over," he warned, before storming out. In the silence that followed, Leo's quiet sniffles filled the room. Thomas knelt down, meeting the boy's tear-filled eyes. "It's all right now," he said softly, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "You're safe." Rachel watched them, her own eyes glistening. "Thomas, we'll handle this," he assured her, still holding Leo's gaze. "Together." For the first time in his life, Thomas felt absolutely certain about what he needed to do. The measured, cautious judge was giving way to something stronger, a father's instinct to protect his child. As Leo's arms wrapped around his neck, Thomas made a silent promise to himself and to Rachel. He would fight for their son, no matter what it took. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Mark Carter approached the podium, his expensive suit perfectly pressed and his hair neatly combed. His confident smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I can provide Leo with the stable environment he deserves," Mark stated, his voice smooth and practiced. "A good school district, a proper home, and most importantly, a healthy parent who can be there for him in the long term." Thomas sat straight-backed in his chair, maintaining his judicial composure despite the twisting in his stomach. From the gallery, Leo's small hand waved enthusiastically at him. Thomas couldn't help but notice how the boy's tie was slightly crooked, just like his own used to be at that age. "Ms. Carter's condition," Mark continued, emphasizing each word, "makes her unfit to provide the care and attention a growing child needs. Her financial situation is equally concerning." Rachel's face paled as she listened to Mark's calculated dismantling of her fitness as a mother. She gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles turning white. "I have documentation showing my income, my new house in the suburbs, and letters from character witnesses attesting to my capability as a father," Mark said, passing a thick folder to the bailiff. Thomas accepted the folder, though his attention was drawn to Rachel. She seemed to be swaying slightly in her chair, her breathing becoming shallow. "Your Honor," Rachel's attorney began, rising to object, but Rachel suddenly slumped forward, her forehead hitting the table with a soft thud. "Mommy!" Leo's cry pierced the formal atmosphere of the courtroom. He jumped up from his seat, tears already streaming down his face. "Order!" Thomas called out, but his voice cracked with concern. He quickly descended from the bench as the courtroom erupted in chaos. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Leo tried to run to his mother, but the bailiff caught him. The boy struggled, his small body shaking with sobs. "I want my mommy. Please let me go to my mommy." Thomas reached them in 3 long strides. Without hesitation, he took Leo from the bailiff's arms. The boy immediately buried his face in Thomas's shoulder, his tears soaking into the judge's robes. "Shh, it's all right," Thomas murmured, rubbing Leo's back as paramedics rushed into the courtroom. "Your mother's going to be okay. The doctors will help her." Mark stood to the side, his polished facade cracking as he watched the scene unfold. "This proves my point exactly," he muttered. But his words were met with glares from nearby observers. As the paramedics lifted Rachel onto a stretcher, her eyes fluttered open briefly. She reached out weakly toward Leo. "I'll take care of him," Thomas said quietly, meeting her gaze. "Focus on getting better." Leo clung tighter to Thomas as they watched the paramedics wheel Rachel away. The boy's small body trembled with hiccuping sobs. "Can we go with Mommy?" Leo asked, his voice muffled against Thomas's shoulder. "Of course we can," Thomas replied, already moving toward the door. He paused only long enough to address the stunned courtroom. "This hearing is adjourned until further notice." Thomas stood in his kitchen, staring helplessly at the contents of his refrigerator. Leo sat at the counter, swinging his legs and watching the judge with curious eyes. "Do you like cheese?" Thomas asked uncertainly, holding up a block of aged cheddar that had seen better days. Leo wrinkled his nose. "Mommy makes me grilled cheese with the orange kind." "Right," Thomas muttered, closing the refrigerator door. He'd never felt more out of his depth, not even during his first day on the bench. "Perhaps we should order—" The doorbell rang, interrupting his culinary crisis. Emily stood on the doorstep, holding several grocery bags. "I thought you might need help," she said, brushing past him into the kitchen. Her eyes softened when she saw Leo. "Hi there. Remember me from before?" Leo nodded shyly. "You're the lady who helped me make paper airplanes." Emily began unpacking the bags, revealing kid-friendly foods and snacks. "I figured Dad might need some backup," she explained, shooting Thomas a knowing look. "Why don't we make some proper grilled cheese sandwiches?" As Emily worked in the kitchen, Thomas watched in amazement as she effortlessly engaged Leo in conversation, getting him to laugh despite his worry about Rachel. "I visited your mom before coming here," Emily said gently, placing a perfectly golden grilled cheese in front of Leo. "The doctors are taking good care of her." "Is she going to be okay?" Leo asked, his small voice trembling. Thomas felt his chest tighten at the question. Emily caught his eye, her expression serious. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" She gestured toward the living room. "Leo, honey, enjoy your sandwich. We'll be right back." In the living room, Emily's composure cracked slightly. "It's not good, Dad. Rachel has advanced stage cancer. She's been hiding it from everyone, trying to stay strong for Leo." Thomas sank into his armchair, the weight of the situation settling over him. "How long?" "Months, maybe." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "And that ex-husband of hers?" He knew. He's been waiting for her to get worse before making his move for custody. Back in the kitchen, Leo's small voice called out, "Judge Thomas? Why is my mommy so sick?" Thomas walked back to the kitchen, his heart heavy. He sat next to Leo, who looked up at him with Rachel's eyes. "Sometimes," Thomas began carefully, "our bodies get sick in ways that doctors try very hard to fix. Your mommy is fighting very hard to get better." "But why?" Leo persisted, pushing his half-eaten sandwich away. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, absolutely not," Thomas said firmly, surprising himself by pulling Leo into a hug. "Nothing about this is your fault. Sometimes things happen that we can't explain or understand." Emily watched from the doorway, her eyes glistening with tears as she witnessed her father's transformation from the emotionally distant man she'd known to someone capable of such tenderness. Later that evening, they received word that Rachel had been stabilized. The doctor's orders were clear. She needed to avoid stress at all costs. As Thomas tucked Leo into the guest room bed, he couldn't help but think about the custody battle looming ahead and the stress it would inevitably cause Rachel. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Leo asked sleepily, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Of course," Thomas replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'll be right here." The kitchen looked like a flour bomb had exploded. White powder covered every surface, including Judge Thomas Langston's usually pristine black dress shoes. Leo stood on a stepping stool, his face scrunched in concentration as he tried to crack an egg into the mixing bowl. "Gently," Thomas coached, watching as eggshell fragments rained into the cookie dough. "Perhaps I should—" "I can do it," Leo insisted, reaching for another egg. This one cracked more successfully, though a bit of shell still made it into the mixture. Thomas found himself smiling despite the mess. From the doorway, Emily watched the scene unfold, her arms crossed but her expression soft. She'd never seen her father like this, patient, encouraging, and completely unconcerned about the disaster zone his kitchen had become. It was so different from her own childhood memories of him insisting on perfect order and proper behavior at all times. "Look," Leo exclaimed, holding up the wooden spoon covered in cookie dough. "Can I taste it?" "Raw eggs aren't safe," Thomas said automatically, then caught himself. "But perhaps just a tiny bit." Emily's breath caught as she remembered all the times she'd been told no for similar requests. The strict judge who'd raised her would never have allowed such a thing. After they managed to get somewhat round cookies onto the baking sheet and into the oven, Thomas suggested they head to the backyard while they waited. He disappeared into the garage and returned with an old baseball mitt. "This was mine when I was about your age," he told Leo, showing him how to put it on. The mitt was comically large on Leo's small hand, but his face lit up with excitement. They played catch, Thomas throwing the ball gently while Leo attempted to catch it. More often than not, the ball rolled past him, but Leo's enthusiasm never wavered. His giggles filled the air each time he managed to grab it. "Dad, I caught it!" Leo shouted after a particularly good catch, then froze, realizing what he'd said. Thomas stood still, the ball forgotten in his hand. Emily watched her father's face, seeing emotions she'd never witnessed before flash across it: surprise, tenderness, and something that looked suspiciously like joy. The moment was interrupted by the phone ringing. Emily hurried inside to answer it, returning moments later with the cordless phone. "It's Rachel," she said, holding it out to her father. Thomas took the phone, his voice softening as he spoke to Rachel. "He's doing fine. Yes, we're being careful. No, it's no trouble at all." He paused, listening. "Rachel, I know you're concerned, but I want you to focus on getting better. Leo is safe here." Emily could hear the worry in Rachel's voice even from where she stood. She understood the mother's fears. Would her father, who'd struggled so much with parenthood before, be able to handle the responsibility of a young child? But as she watched Leo run up to Thomas, tugging on his sleeve and pointing urgently toward the house while shouting, "The cookies, the cookies," Emily realized something had fundamentally changed in her father. The man who'd once been so rigid he couldn't attend a single one of her school plays was now racing toward the kitchen with a 5-year-old, both of them laughing, despite the smell of slightly burnt cookies wafting through the air. Judge Thomas Langston sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the legal document before him. Rachel's ex-husband's petition lay on his desk like a ticking bomb. The words "unfit parent" and "judicial misconduct" jumped off the page, making his stomach churn. "Your Honor," his legal advisor, Mark Stevens, spoke carefully from across the desk. This petition raises serious concerns. Your involvement with Leo while presiding over his custody case. It could end your career." Thomas removed his reading glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "I recused myself from the case weeks ago." "That may not be enough," Mark replied, his voice gentle but firm. "The Ethics Committee could view your entire involvement as compromised. 25 years on the bench, Thomas. Are you willing to risk that?" The weight of the decision pressed down on Thomas's shoulders. He thought of Leo's face that morning, bright and trusting as they'd said goodbye. The boy had drawn another picture, this one of himself and Thomas playing catch with "Me and Dad" written in wobbly letters across the top. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Emily stood there, her expression fierce. "Dad, we need to talk." Mark excused himself, leaving father and daughter alone. Emily walked straight to his desk, placing both hands on its surface and leaning forward. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're considering walking away to protect your precious career." "Emily, it's not that simple." "It is that simple," she cut him off. "You're scared, just like you were scared to show up at my school plays or my college graduation, always worried about appearances, about what people might think." Thomas flinched at her words. "I have responsibilities." "To Leo," Emily's voice cracked. "That little boy loves you. He needs you, and I've seen how much you love him too." Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Thomas?" Rachel's voice was weak but determined. "I just heard about David's petition. Please don't let him take Leo." "Rachel, my position as a judge—" "I know what he's trying to do," she interrupted. "He's using your career against you because he knows you care about Leo. He's trying to force you out of the picture." She paused, catching her breath. "Leo needs someone who'll put him first, someone who'll love him more than their own ambitions." Thomas looked up at Emily, seeing tears in her eyes. He remembered the day Leo had first called him Dad, the way his heart had swelled with unexpected joy. He thought of all the moments he'd missed with Emily, all the times he'd chosen his career over being a father. "I won't let you down," he said firmly, speaking to both Rachel and Emily. "Not this time." Emily's face softened with relief as Thomas reached for his phone, dialing his attorney's number. "Barbara, this is Thomas Langston. I need you to prepare a counterpetition. I'm fighting for custody of my son, and I don't care what it costs me." The hospital corridor felt endless as Thomas walked beside Leo, holding the boy's small hand. Emily followed close behind, carrying a bundle of art supplies they'd brought to brighten up Rachel's room. The antiseptic smell and fluorescent lights made everything feel stark and unwelcoming, but Leo bounced along with the resilience only a child could muster. "Is Mommy going to like my new drawings?" Leo asked, clutching his folder of artwork to his chest with his free hand. Thomas squeezed Leo's hand gently. "She'll love them, son. Your mother always lights up when she sees your art." They reached Rachel's room where she lay propped up against white pillows, her face pale, but her eyes bright. "There's my little artist," she called out, managing a warm smile despite her obvious fatigue. Leo rushed to her bedside, careful not to bump the IV stand. "Mommy, I made so many pictures, and Emily showed me how to use real paints." Emily stepped forward, ruffling Leo's hair. "He's a natural, Rachel. We spent yesterday afternoon at my art studio, and he created the most amazing things." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as Leo spread his artwork across her blanket. "These are beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me about each one." Thomas watched from the doorway as Leo explained his drawings with animated gestures. His heart ached seeing Rachel's frailty, but he marveled at her strength in maintaining such enthusiasm for their son. "And this one," Leo paused, pulling out his final piece. "This is all of us together." The painting showed 3 figures holding hands, a tall man in black robes, a woman with a bright smile, and a small boy between them. Above them arched a rainbow, and beneath their feet grew a garden of multicolored flowers. "I made it special," Leo explained, his voice dropping to a whisper, "because maybe if I wish hard enough, it'll make you better, Mommy." Rachel pulled Leo close, pressing a kiss to his forehead as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Oh, my sweet boy." Emily caught Thomas's eye, and he saw his own pain reflected in her face. She'd been spending every afternoon with Leo at her studio, teaching him about colors and shapes, helping him express his feelings through art. It was a side of his daughter he'd never known existed, patient, nurturing, creative. Later, while Emily took Leo to the hospital cafeteria for a snack, Thomas sat beside Rachel's bed. "I should have told you about him," Rachel said softly, still holding Leo's painting. "Every time I saw him do something that reminded me of you, the way he furrows his brow when he's thinking, how he arranges his toys in perfect lines, I felt guilty for keeping him from you." Thomas leaned forward, taking her hand. "We can't change the past, Rachel, but I promise you, I'm here now, for both of you." Rachel squeezed his hand weakly. "He needs you, Thomas, more than ever. And I see how much you've changed, how you're trying to be the father he deserves." Before Thomas could respond, Leo burst back into the room, Emily following with a chocolate milk carton in hand. He climbed onto Rachel's bed, careful of the tubes and wires, and pointed to his painting again. "See, Mommy, I made the flowers extra bright because you love gardens. And I put Daddy in his judge clothes because that's how I first saw him. And you're smiling because that's how I always want to remember you." Rachel hugged Leo close, her smile radiant despite her tears. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." The courtroom buzzed with tension as Rachel's ex-husband's lawyer approached the bench. Judge Martinez, who had taken over the case, listened intently as damning medical records were presented. "Your Honor, Ms. Carter's condition makes her unable to provide the stable environment Leo needs," the lawyer argued, his voice sharp. "And furthermore, Judge Langston's sudden involvement raises serious ethical concerns." Thomas sat behind the barrier, no longer in his judicial robes, but in a crisp navy suit. His jaw tightened as Rachel's ex-husband took the stand, painting himself as the only suitable guardian. "I have a stable income, a new home, and the means to provide Leo with the best education," he declared, shooting a smug look at Rachel. "Unlike some people who've been hiding crucial information about our son's parentage." Thomas stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor, I request permission to address the court." Judge Martinez nodded and Thomas walked to the center of the courtroom. "I am officially stepping down as a judge in this district to pursue custody of my son. My career means nothing compared to ensuring Leo's well-being." Gasps echoed through the room. Emily, sitting in the gallery, smiled proudly at her father's declaration. Rachel took the stand next, her voice trembling but determined. "Leo needs love, not just material things," she said, wiping away tears. "He needs his father, his real father, who, despite only knowing him for a short time, has shown more genuine care than my ex-husband ever did." The emotional testimony had several jurors dabbing their eyes. Even Judge Martinez seemed moved. Suddenly, Leo's small voice piped up from where he sat with Emily. "Can't I just live with both Daddy and Mommy?" The tension in the room broke as several people chuckled softly. Leo's innocent question highlighted the absurdity of the adults fighting. Judge Martinez peered down at Leo with gentle eyes. "Young man, we're all trying to figure out what's best for you." "I think we need time to process these new developments," Judge Martinez announced, tapping her gavel. "Court will reconvene in 3 days for final arguments. Dismissed." As people filed out of the courtroom, Rachel's ex-husband brushed past Thomas, muttering, "This isn't over, Your Honor. Or should I say, Mr. Langston?" The evening sun cast long shadows through Thomas's living room windows as he sat with Leo on the couch. The boy was curled up against him, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Dad?" Leo's small voice broke the comfortable silence. "Will you always be here to take care of me?" Thomas's heart clenched at the question. He looked down at Leo's earnest face, seeing his own eyes looking back at him. "Yes, Leo. I promise I'll always be here for you." "Even when I'm really old, like 10? Leo asked, making Thomas smile despite the weight of the moment. "Even then and long after that." Later that afternoon, Emily took Leo to the ice cream parlor down the street. As they sat at a small table with their sundaes, Leo swirled his spoon through the melting ice cream. "Miss Emily," he said quietly, "is my mommy going to go away like the angels?" Emily's hand trembled as she set down her spoon. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "Because she's always tired now, and sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping." Leo's lower lip quivered. "I don't want her to go away." Emily reached across the table and squeezed his small hand. "Your mommy loves you very much, Leo. And no matter what happens, you'll always have people who love you." Back at home, Thomas sat at his desk late into the night, surrounded by legal documents and parenting books. His computer screen glowed with articles about custody laws and childhood development. He'd already filled 3 legal pads with notes. Emily found him there, bringing him a cup of coffee. "You're really committed to this, aren't you, Dad?" Thomas looked up at his daughter, seeing the new warmth in her eyes. "I have to be. I can't fail Leo the way I—" He trailed off, but Emily understood. "You're different with him," she said softly. "I see it." When bedtime came, Thomas helped Leo into his pajamas and tucked him into the guest bed that was quickly becoming his own. Leo's eyes were already heavy with sleep. "Dad," he mumbled, "will you stay until I fall asleep?" Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, gently running his hand through Leo's hair. "Of course I will. I'll always be here when you need me, Leo. Always." As Leo drifted off to sleep, Thomas realized with startling clarity that he wasn't just saying these words out of duty or obligation. He loved this little boy, truly and completely, with a depth of feeling he hadn't known he was capable of. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Rachel's ex-husband stood before the judge, his face twisted with manufactured outrage. "Your Honor, I have evidence that proves both Rachel Carter and Thomas Langston conspired to keep my son from me." He produced a stack of papers with flourish. Thomas's stomach tightened as he watched from his seat. The documents being presented looked official, but he knew they were fabrications. His years on the bench had taught him to spot forgeries. "These records show Ms. Carter deliberately concealed Leo's whereabouts," the ex-husband declared. "And Judge Langston abused his position to help her do it." Rachel's hands trembled in her lap. "That's not true," she whispered, her face pale with distress. The judge examined the papers while murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Thomas stood up, his voice steady despite his anger. "Your Honor, I request an immediate investigation into these documents. They are clearly forged, and I will not allow these false accusations to stand." Meanwhile, at Emily's art studio across town, Leo sat at an easel, his small hands covered in bright paint. Emily watched as he created swirling patterns of blue and green. "What are you painting, Leo?" she asked gently. "It's how I feel inside," he replied, adding dark spots to the canvas, all mixed up and swirly. Emily's heart ached at his words. She'd brought him here to protect him from the courthouse drama, but she could see how deeply he felt the tension. Back in the courtroom, Rachel and Thomas met with their legal team during a recess. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their worried faces. "We need to prove these documents are fake," Rachel said, her voice stronger now despite her exhaustion. "He's trying to destroy everything we've built for Leo." Thomas nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I've seen cases like this before from the other side of the bench. We'll request a forensic document examiner. Every forgery leaves traces." Their attorney made quick notes while Rachel and Thomas shared a look of resolve. They wouldn't let these false accusations tear their family apart, not when Leo needed them both so desperately. The forensic document examiner's findings arrived on a bright Tuesday morning. Thomas sat at his kitchen table, poring over the report with growing satisfaction. The expert had identified multiple inconsistencies in the paper stock, ink age, and signature patterns of the documents Rachel's ex-husband had presented. "Look at this," Thomas said to Rachel, who sat across from him sipping tea. Her color had returned somewhat, and she looked stronger than she had in weeks. "The watermarks don't match the dates. He didn't even use the right paper type for that year." Rachel smiled, her first genuine smile in days. "So his whole case is built on lies?" "Not just the documents," Thomas replied. Our investigator found irregularities in his financial records too. Those big business deals he bragged about? Most of them fell through months ago. Later that afternoon, Rachel took advantage of her renewed energy to take Leo to the park. She watched him climb the jungle gym, his laughter carrying across the playground. These were the moments she wanted to bottle up and keep forever. "Mommy, watch this," Leo called out, hanging upside down from a bar. Rachel's heart swelled as she captured the moment with her phone camera. Back at Thomas's house that evening, Leo stood in front of a mirror while Thomas knelt beside him. "The wide end goes over and under just like this," Thomas demonstrated, guiding Leo's small hands through the motions of tying a tie. "Like that?" Leo asked, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he attempted to copy the movements. "Perfect," Thomas praised, catching Emily's reflection in the mirror as she watched from the doorway. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition of all the father-child moments they'd missed over the years. In the courthouse the next day, the judge presiding over the case reviewed the forensic findings. Rachel's ex-husband sat stiffly in his chair, his confident facade crumbling as his attorney whispered urgently in his ear. "The court has reviewed the evidence regarding the authenticity of the submitted documents," the judge announced, her voice stern. "In light of these findings and the additional financial discrepancies that have come to light, I am calling for final arguments to be presented tomorrow morning." Rachel reached for Thomas's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. For the first time since this battle began, victory felt within reach. Emily Langston took a deep breath as she settled into the witness stand. The courtroom felt smaller than usual, with every eye fixed on her. She smoothed her skirt and faced the attorney who would question her. "Miss Langston, please tell us about your observations of your father's relationship with Leo," the attorney prompted. Emily's voice started soft but grew stronger. "When I first heard about Leo, I was skeptical. My father, he wasn't always the most emotionally available parent when I was growing up." She glanced at Thomas, who sat with his hands clasped tightly together. "But the man I see with Leo is someone I never knew existed." She described finding Thomas and Leo making cookies in the kitchen, flour everywhere, both of them laughing. "My father never laughed like that when I was young," she said, her voice catching. "He's learned to be playful, patient, and loving in ways I never thought possible." Rachel's ex-husband's attorney stood up, his face stern. "Isn't it true that you have a strained relationship with your father? How can you possibly vouch for his parenting abilities?" Emily lifted her chin. "That's exactly why my testimony matters. I know firsthand what it was like to have an emotionally distant father. The man I see with Leo is completely different. He reads bedtime stories, helps with art projects, and most importantly, he listens to Leo's feelings." From his seat near the front, Leo beamed at Emily, giving her a small wave. She smiled back, drawing strength from his innocent support. "My father has changed," Emily continued, her voice steady and clear. "Leo brought out something in him that I always hoped existed. They have a beautiful bond that deserves to be protected and nurtured." In her hospital room, Rachel watched the testimony on a tablet, tears streaming down her face as she smiled. Emily's words painted a picture of hope. Hope for Leo's future, hope for healing old wounds, and hope for the family they were all becoming. When Rachel's ex-husband's attorney tried one final time to discredit Emily, suggesting she was biased due to her own complicated relationship with her father, Emily remained composed. "Yes, my father and I have had our struggles," she acknowledged. "But watching him with Leo has helped me understand him better. He's not just trying to be a better father to Leo. He's trying to be a better father to me too. And that takes real courage." The courtroom fell silent, absorbing the weight of her words. Thomas sat with tears in his eyes, while Leo proudly drew a picture of Emily at the witness stand, adding a superhero cape to her figure. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the lead investigator presented his findings. Document after document flashed on the projection screen, each one revealing another layer of deception in Rachel's ex-husband's claims. "Your Honor," the investigator stated firmly, "these bank statements have been digitally altered. The defendant's claimed assets are largely fabricated." Rachel's ex-husband shifted uncomfortably in his chair as his carefully constructed facade crumbled. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but the damage was done. Later, in the marble-floored hallway outside the courtroom, Rachel confronted her ex-husband. Her face was pale but determined, her voice steady despite her weakness. "How could you?" she asked softly. "Leo deserves better than lies and manipulation. He needs stability and love, not someone who would deceive a court just to win." Her ex-husband avoided her gaze, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You wanted to win," Rachel cut him off. "But this was never about winning. It was about Leo's future." Inside the courtroom, Thomas rose from his seat, his voice clear and resolute. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, I am formally requesting custody of Leo." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. "As his biological father, I want to ensure he has the stable, loving home he deserves." Leo, who had been quietly coloring beside Emily, looked up at Thomas with wide eyes. "Does this mean you'll always stay with me?" he asked innocently, his small voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. Thomas knelt beside Leo's chair, his usual stern expression softening. "That's exactly what it means, son." The presiding judge cleared his throat, gathering everyone's attention. "Given today's revelations and the new custody petition, I'm scheduling the final hearing for next week. We'll make our final determination then." The gallery began to clear as the judge's gavel fell, marking the end of another dramatic day in court. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of Thomas's living room as the unlikely family gathered for dinner. Emily had prepared lasagna, filling the house with warm, comforting aromas that made Leo bounce excitedly in his chair. Rachel sat on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket despite the warm evening. Her face was tired but peaceful as she watched Leo help Emily set the table. "You know," Rachel said softly, "I used to dream about moments like this." She turned to Leo, who had settled beside her. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way we planned, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful." Thomas watched from his armchair, noticing how Emily's hands trembled slightly as she arranged the plates. She caught his eye, and he cleared his throat. "Emily," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I've been thinking about all the times I wasn't there for you, all the dance recitals I missed, the parent-teacher conferences I skipped." He paused, struggling with the words. "I was wrong. I thought being a good judge meant I couldn't be a good father. I see now how wrong I was." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "Dad, watching you with Leo, it's like seeing a different person. I'm proud of who you're becoming." Leo looked between them, his small face serious. "Are you not mad at each other anymore?" Emily laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "No, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups just need time to learn and change." Thomas reached out and took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "I promise to do better. For both of you." After dinner, Leo convinced Thomas to read him a story. They settled into the oversized reading chair, Leo tucked safely against Thomas's chest as he opened the book. Rachel watched them from her place on the couch, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The sight of her son, so secure and loved in his father's arms, filled her heart with a bittersweet peace. She felt Emily's hand slip into hers, offering quiet support. "He'll be okay," Emily whispered, understanding the thoughts behind Rachel's tears. "Dad will make sure of it." Thomas's deep voice carried across the room as he read, one hand absently smoothing Leo's hair. The boy's eyes were heavy with sleep, but his small fingers held tightly to Thomas's shirt, as if afraid to let go of this perfect moment. Rachel squeezed Emily's hand, watching her son and his father share this quiet moment of love and trust. In their gentle interaction, she saw all her hopes for Leo's future coming true. The final hearing room buzzed with tension as people filed in, filling every available seat. Rachel sat at the front, her face pale but determined, while Thomas stood tall beside his lawyer. Leo waited outside with Emily, protected from the strain of the proceedings. The judge, a seasoned woman with kind eyes, called the room to order. "We're here today to determine the custody arrangements for Leo Carter," she announced, her voice steady and clear. Rachel's ex-husband made his final attempt, standing before the court with rehearsed confidence. "Your Honor, I can provide the stability and resources that Leo needs," he declared. but his words rang hollow after the exposure of his deceptions. When Rachel's turn came, she rose slowly, gripping the podium for support. "Leo deserves more than just stability," she began, her voice soft but unwavering. "He deserves love, understanding, and the chance to know his real father. Judge Langston has proven himself to be everything I hoped he would be for our son." Thomas stepped forward next, his usual judicial demeanor softened by emotion. "I stand before you not as a judge, but as a father who failed one child and is determined not to fail another," he said, glancing at the door where Emily waited with Leo. "I've learned that being a parent isn't about perfection. It's about love, commitment, and the willingness to grow. Leo has taught me that." The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered her decision. Minutes stretched like hours until she finally spoke. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimonies, I find it in the best interest of Leo Carter to remain in the primary custody of Rachel Carter, with Judge Thomas Langston granted joint legal custody and generous visitation rights." She paused, looking directly at Rachel's ex-husband. "The petition from Mr. Carter is denied." Relief flooded the courtroom. Rachel's shoulders sagged as happy tears spilled down her cheeks. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand gently. Emily brought Leo into the courtroom, and he ran straight to Rachel and Thomas. "Did we win?" he asked, looking between them with bright eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, pulling him close. "We did." Leo threw his arms around both Rachel and Thomas, squeezing them tight. "Now I have the best family ever," he declared, his joy echoing through the courtroom. The autumn breeze rustled through the park as Rachel sat on a weathered wooden bench, watching Thomas push Leo on the swings. Her son's laughter carried across the playground, pure and bright, mixing with the sound of crunching leaves beneath their feet. "Higher, Dad, higher!" Leo called out, and Thomas obliged with gentle pushes, his usual stern expression replaced by a warm smile. Back at Thomas's house, evidence of change filled every room. The once austere study now featured a child-sized desk where Leo could do his homework while Thomas worked. Colorful drawings decorated the refrigerator, held up by alphabet magnets. Even the spare room had transformed into a cheerful bedroom with space-themed wallpaper and a collection of stuffed animals on the bed. "Do you like your new room?" Thomas had asked Leo during the first weekend stay. "It's perfect," Leo had exclaimed, bouncing on his new bed with excitement. Emily visited often, bringing her art supplies and endless patience. She set up an easel in the sunroom, where she and Leo spent hours painting together. Their shared creativity bridged the generations, healing old wounds as they created new memories. "Look what we made today, Mom." Leo rushed to Rachel one afternoon, holding up a vibrant watercolor painting. The picture showed 4 figures holding hands: Rachel, Thomas, Emily, and Leo, standing under a rainbow. Rachel's eyes welled up with tears as she studied the artwork. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling him close. "Emily helped me mix the colors just right," Leo explained proudly. "She says every family has its own special colors, and ours has lots of them." The painting found its place of honor on the living room wall, where both households could see it during visits. It became a symbol of their unconventional but loving family, a reminder of how far they'd come from those tense days in the courtroom. During transitions between homes, Leo skipped happily, carrying his backpack filled with artwork and stories to share. There were no more tears or confusion, just the natural rhythm of a child moving between 2 spaces where he was deeply loved. Thomas watched his son's easy adaptability with amazement, learning daily lessons in flexibility and joy from Leo's example. The judge who once lived by rigid rules now found himself building pillow forts and telling bedtime stories, discovering that the best moments in life often came unplanned. The first signs of Rachel's declining health appeared on a crisp Monday morning. Her hands trembled as she tried to pour Leo's cereal, and the milk splashed across the kitchen counter. Leo watched with worried eyes, his small forehead creasing with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked, his spoon frozen halfway to his mouth. Rachel forced a smile, but her pallor told a different story. "Just a little tired, sweetheart." That afternoon, Thomas received the call he'd been dreading. Rachel's doctor recommended immediate hospitalization. Within hours, Thomas and Emily reorganized their schedules to care for Leo while Rachel underwent treatment. In the hospital room, Rachel's usually vibrant presence seemed diminished against the stark white sheets. Thomas sat beside her bed while Leo napped in Emily's arms on the visitor's couch. "Thomas," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beep of monitors. "I need to tell you something important." She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm despite her weakness. "I've been trying to protect Leo from this, but he's starting to notice. He keeps asking why I'm so tired all the time." Thomas leaned forward, his judicial composure cracking. "What do you want me to tell him?" Tears slipped down Rachel's cheeks. "The truth, but in a way that won't frighten him. He needs to know that no matter what happens, he'll always be loved and protected." Later that week, Emily took Leo to her art studio, spreading out fresh canvases and bright paints. "Let's make something special for your mom," she suggested, helping him select colors. "Why does Mom have to stay at the hospital?" Leo asked suddenly, his small hand clutching a paintbrush. "Is she going to get better?" Emily's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "The doctors are doing everything they can to help her feel better. Want to know what always makes her smile? Your beautiful artwork." While they painted, Thomas sat with Rachel in her hospital room. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope from beneath her pillow, her hands shaking slightly. "I've been writing this for Leo," she explained, her eyes filling with tears. "For when he's older and has questions I might not be able to answer." She pressed the envelope into Thomas's hands. "Promise me you'll give it to him when the time is right." Thomas gripped the envelope, his throat tight with emotion. "Rachel, promise me you'll tell him every day how much I love him," she continued, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll help him remember the good times, the happy moments." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. He watched as Rachel closed her eyes, exhausted from the conversation. In the quiet hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the soft whisper of oxygen, he realized how much their lives had changed since that first day in his courtroom. The letter sat heavy in his hands, filled with a mother's love and hopes for her child's future. Thomas carefully tucked it into his jacket. Rachel sat at Thomas's dining room table, watching as Emily and Leo arranged flowers in a mason jar. Despite her weakness, she had insisted on helping prepare dinner, though Thomas and Emily had gently steered her toward supervising instead. The aroma of pot roast, Thomas's first attempt at cooking a proper family meal, filled the house. "Look, Mom," Leo held up the jar proudly. "Emily showed me how to make the flowers dance in the water." Rachel smiled, her heart full as she watched her son's eyes sparkle with joy. The table was set with Thomas's best china, a touch that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Such a simple thing, family dinner, yet it meant everything now. "I made something special today," Leo announced, running to fetch his backpack. He returned, clutching a large piece of paper, carefully protected in a clear sleeve Emily had given him. Rachel's hands trembled as she took the artwork. The painting showed all of them together, herself, Leo, Thomas, and Emily, standing in front of a house with a bright yellow sun above. Leo had captured Thomas's height, Emily's long hair, and even included Rachel's favorite blue sweater. In the painting, they were all holding hands, their smiles wide and colorful. "Oh, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "It's beautiful." Thomas moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. His own eyes grew misty as he studied the painting. "You've captured us perfectly, Leo," he said, his voice rough with emotion. During dinner, Rachel watched as her unlikely family shared stories and laughter. Emily told them about her first art show disaster, when all her paintings had fallen off the wall 5 minutes before opening. Leo giggled at Thomas's attempt to explain why the pot roast was slightly overdone, complete with dramatic gestures describing his battle with the oven timer. After the meal, while Emily helped Leo clean up his art supplies, Rachel found a quiet moment with Thomas in the kitchen. "Thank you," she said softly, watching him load the dishwasher with methodical precision. "For everything." Thomas paused, turning to face her. Rachel, Please, she interrupted gently. Let me say this. You've given Leo something I always wanted for him, a father who loves him completely. And Emily. She glanced toward the living room where Emily was showing Leo how to properly clean his paintbrushes. She's become the big sister he never had. Thomas's usual judicial composure slipped, revealing the depth of emotion he typically kept hidden. You gave me a second chance at being a father, he said. You trusted me with our son even when I didn't trust myself. Rachel reached out and squeezed his hand. In that moment, all their past complications and misunderstandings fell away, leaving only their shared love for Leo and their mutual respect for each other's role in his life. Later, as Emily helped her to the couch, Rachel pulled her close. Promise me something. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Keep teaching him to see the beauty in everything just like you do, Rachel whispered. Help him paint his feelings when words aren't enough. I promise, Emily replied, her voice thick with emotion. He'll always know how much you love him. We'll make sure of it. The peaceful afternoon was shattered by the sound of angry voices in the courthouse hallway. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Rachel as her ex-husband stormed toward them, waving a stack of papers. She can barely stand, the ex-husband shouted, pointing accusingly at Rachel. How can anyone think she's fit to make decisions about Leo's future? Rachel's face paled, but she held her ground. Leo, thankfully, was with Emily at her art studio, safe from this latest drama. Mr. Carter, Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of his years on the bench. I suggest you lower your voice and remember where you are. The ex-husband thrust the papers at Thomas. I've filed an emergency petition. Her condition makes her unfit for custody. The boy needs stability, not a dying mother and a judge playing daddy. Thomas felt his anger rise but kept his composure. Is that what this is about? Or is it about the trust fund you lost access to when the court discovered your fraudulent documents? Rachel's ex-husband's face reddened. You don't know anything about... I know everything, Thomas interrupted, his voice sharp but controlled. I know about the gambling debts, the failed business ventures, the money you borrowed from Leo's college fund before Rachel discovered what you were doing. The ex-husband took a step back, his confidence wavering. Your Honor, Rachel's lawyer intervened, approaching with several folders. We anticipated this attempt. I have documentation of Mr. Carter's recent activities, including his attempts to access Leo's trust fund just last week. Thomas turned to Rachel, who looked exhausted but determined. Would you like to address the court about this? Rachel nodded, straightening her shoulders. Inside the courtroom, she spoke with quiet dignity. My illness doesn't define my ability to love and guide my son. Judge Langston and I have created a stable, loving environment for Leo. My ex-husband abandoned us years ago, showing up only when money was involved. The presiding judge reviewed the new evidence, his expression growing sterner by the minute. Thomas stood beside Rachel, his presence steady and reassuring. Mr. Carter, the judge finally spoke, your petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warning. Any further attempts to disrupt this custody arrangement will result in severe consequences. The ex-husband's face contorted with anger. This isn't over. It is over, Thomas cut in, his voice firm but controlled. You've lost every legitimate claim to Leo. Your fraudulent documents, your attempted theft from his trust fund, your absence during his formative years, all of it is documented. Walk away now while you still have some dignity left. The courtroom fell silent as Rachel's ex-husband looked from face to face, finding no allies. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Get out, the judge ordered, and don't come back. As the ex-husband skulked out of the courtroom, Rachel sagged slightly against Thomas. He supported her discreetly, his hand steady at her elbow. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas shook his head. No thanks needed. We're family now, and family protects each other. The judge made a final note in his records, officially dismissing the petition. As they left the courtroom, Rachel's lawyer confirmed that any future attempts by the ex-husband would be immediately thrown out. Thomas helped Rachel to a nearby bench. Let's rest a moment before we pick up Leo. He'll want to hear how his dad protected his mom today. Rachel smiled weakly, but her eyes shone with gratitude. He'll love that story. The autumn sunlight filtered through the hospice window, casting a soft glow on Rachel's pale face as she lay in her bed. Leo sat beside her, his small hand clutching hers while Thomas and Emily stood nearby, their hearts heavy with unspoken grief. "Tell me about your painting, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with love. Leo held up his latest artwork, a vibrant explosion of colors depicting their family under a rainbow. "See, Mommy? That's you and Daddy Thomas and Emily and me. We're all holding hands." Rachel's eyes sparkled with tears as she smiled. "It's beautiful, Leo. Just like you." Thomas watched the exchange, his throat tight with emotion. He'd never imagined feeling such deep love and sorrow simultaneously. Emily placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. Later that afternoon, while Emily took Leo to get a snack from the vending machine, Rachel beckoned Thomas closer. With trembling hands, she pulled out an envelope from beneath her pillow. "This is for Leo," she said, pressing the letter into Thomas's hands. "When he's older, when he starts asking the hard questions about me, about why I had to leave, will you read it to him?" Thomas nodded, carefully tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket. "I promise, Rachel. He'll know every word." "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for becoming the father he deserves, for loving him, for protecting him." "Rachel, Please," she interrupted softly. "Let me say this while I still can. You've given Leo something I always dreamed of for him. A real family. You and Emily. You've made our little boy's world complete." When Leo and Emily returned, they found Rachel sitting up slightly, her energy briefly renewed. "Let's sing Leo's special song," she suggested. Together, they sang the lullaby Rachel had created for Leo when he was a baby. Their voices blended in the quiet room, Rachel's weak but determined, Leo's clear and sweet, Emily's gentle, and Thomas's surprisingly tender. As evening approached, Rachel's breathing became more labored. Emily noticed Leo's growing anxiety and gently took his hand. "Hey, buddy, want to come look at the stars with me?" On the hospice center's small patio, Emily held Leo close as they gazed up at the emerging stars. "You see those bright ones up there?" she asked, pointing to the sky. "They're like little night lights. And just like those stars will always shine down on us, your mom's love will always be with you." Leo leaned against her. "Even when I can't see her?" "Especially then," Emily assured him, her voice thick with emotion. "Love doesn't go away, Leo. It just changes shape." Inside the room, Rachel's eyes found Thomas's. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll tell him every day how much I love him." "Every single day," Thomas vowed, holding her hand. "He'll never doubt it for a moment." Rachel smiled peacefully, her gaze drifting to the window where she could see Leo and Emily still stargazing. "Our boy will be okay," she murmured. "He has you both now." Her breathing slowed, becoming softer and softer, until finally, with one last gentle sigh, Rachel slipped away. Thomas bowed his head, tears falling freely as he continued holding her hand, honoring these final moments of the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life, their son. The evening sun cast long shadows across Judge Thomas Langston's living room as he sat with Leo on the oversized leather armchair. His hands trembled slightly as he opened Rachel's letter. Emily perched nearby on the couch, offering silent support. "Your mommy wrote this for you," Thomas explained softly, unfolding the pages. Leo snuggled closer, his small hand resting on the paper's edge. "My dearest Leo," Thomas began reading, his voice steady despite the emotion welling in his throat. "Every day since you were born has been a gift. Your smile lights up rooms, and your heart is so big it could hold the whole world." As Thomas read Rachel's words about being brave and kind, Leo's eyes grew wide with wonder. "She says I should always remember to laugh, even when things are hard," Leo whispered, touching the paper gently. The next morning, Emily arrived with gardening supplies and colorful flower seedlings. "These are forget-me-nots," she explained to Leo as they knelt in the soft earth of Thomas's backyard. "They're perfect for remembering special people we love." Leo's small hands pressed the soil around each delicate plant. "Mommy loved flowers," he said softly, carefully watering the newly planted garden. "She did," Emily agreed, showing him how to arrange the plants in a heart shape. "And now we'll have these beautiful blooms to remind us of her." Thomas watched from the patio, his heart full as he observed his daughter and son working together. Later that week, he surprised them both by signing up for family art classes at Emily's studio. "Really, Dad?" Emily asked, her eyes bright with surprise and joy. Thomas nodded, watching Leo excitedly grab his colored pencils. "Really, every Saturday morning, all three of us." As spring emerged, they sat together in the backyard, watching the first forget-me-nots bloom in their memorial garden. Leo leaned against Thomas, pointing at the tiny blue flowers. "Look, Daddy, they're waking up." Thomas wrapped an arm around his son, Emily sitting cross-legged nearby, sketching the scene in her notebook. The garden was coming alive, just as Rachel had promised in her letter, a reminder that love continued to grow in new and beautiful ways. "Mommy would love these flowers," Leo said confidently, his voice full of peace rather than sadness. "She certainly would, buddy," Thomas replied, holding his son close. "She certainly would." As summer settled in, Judge Thomas Langston found himself navigating the delicate balance between his courtroom duties and his new role as Leo's primary caregiver. Each morning brought fresh challenges, from making sure Leo ate a proper breakfast to coordinating after-school activities. One Saturday morning, while organizing Rachel's belongings, Thomas discovered a worn wooden box tucked away in his study. Leo wandered in, still in his dinosaur pajamas, and climbed onto his father's lap. "What's that, Daddy?" Leo asked, pointing at the box. Thomas opened it carefully, revealing a collection of treasures: photographs, dried flowers, and small notes written in Rachel's flowing handwriting. Leo's eyes widened as he picked up a picture of himself as a baby, cradled in Rachel's arms. "Mommy looks so happy here," Leo said softly, tracing her smile with his finger. Emily arrived later that morning to find father and son still absorbed in exploring the box's contents. She joined them on the floor, helping Leo arrange the photos in chronological order while sharing stories about Rachel. "Look at this one," Emily said, holding up a snapshot of Rachel pushing Leo on a swing. "Your mom always said your laugh was her favorite sound in the whole world." Thomas noticed how Leo seemed lighter after these moments of remembrance, as if sharing memories of Rachel helped ease his grief. Emily suggested they start attending local community events together, and soon their weekends filled with trips to the farmer's market and outdoor concerts in the park. At one such event, Thomas watched as Emily taught Leo how to make paper airplanes from the concert program. His daughter had stepped naturally into a nurturing role, helping fill the void Rachel's passing had left in Leo's life. That evening, as Thomas tucked Leo into bed, the boy reached under his pillow and pulled out a slightly crumpled handmade card. The front featured a crayon drawing of two figures, one tall with a judge's robe, the other small with a bright smile. Inside, in Leo's careful kindergarten printing, were the words, "Thank you for being my dad." Thomas felt his throat tighten as he held the card. Leo wrapped his arms around his father's neck in a tight hug, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." The simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come together, healing and growing stronger as a family despite their loss. The local art gallery buzzed with excitement as Emily led Leo through the bright, open space. Her photographs and paintings lined the pristine white walls, each piece telling its own story. Leo's eyes widened as he took in the vibrant colors and striking images. "Did you make all of these, Aunt Emily?" Leo asked, squeezing her hand. "I did," Emily smiled, kneeling beside him. "Art helps us share our feelings when words aren't enough." She guided him to a small table set up with watercolors and paper. Leo settled in, his tongue poking out in concentration as he began to paint. His small hands moved with purpose across the paper, creating familiar shapes and colors. Thomas arrived shortly after, dressed in a crisp suit despite it being his day off. He walked slowly through the gallery, studying each piece of Emily's work with genuine interest. When he reached a striking black and white photograph of a solitary tree in winter, he paused. "This is extraordinary, Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you were so talented." Emily stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "You never really asked before," she said softly. "But I understand why now. We both had our walls up for so long." Thomas turned to face his daughter. "I missed so much of your life being stuck in my own ways. I'm sorry, Emily. Truly sorry." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "I know, Dad. I forgive you." Their moment was interrupted by Leo's excited voice. "Look what I made!" He held up a painting, still wet with watercolors. It showed a woman with flowing hair and a bright smile. Rachel, captured through the eyes of her son. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Emily said, pulling him close. "We should hang it somewhere special." "Can we put it in the living room?" Leo asked, looking up at Thomas. "So Mommy can watch over us?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. A gallery assistant offered to take their picture, and they gathered together, Thomas with his arm around Emily, Leo between them holding his painting. As the camera flashed, their smiles were genuine, 3 generations united by love and healing. The morning sun had barely risen when Thomas loaded the car with picnic supplies and fishing gear. He smiled to himself, thinking of the surprise he had planned for Leo and Emily. When he pulled up to Emily's apartment, Leo was already bouncing with excitement on the front steps. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, climbing into the back seat. "Is it somewhere fun?" "You'll see," Thomas replied, exchanging a knowing look with Emily as she settled into the passenger seat. The drive to the lake took just under an hour. As they rounded the final bend, the water came into view, sparkling like diamonds under the morning light. Leo pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with wonder. "A lake!" he exclaimed. "Can we go swimming?" "It might be too cold for swimming," Emily laughed, "but we can do plenty of other things." They found a perfect spot under a large oak tree near the shore. Thomas spread out a checkered blanket, while Emily helped Leo collect smooth, flat stones from the water's edge. The boy returned with his pockets full, eager to show off his finds. "Mommy taught me how to skip stones," Leo announced proudly. "Want me to show you how, Dad?" Thomas felt his heart warm at Leo's casual use of Dad. "I'd love that, son." Leo demonstrated with the patience of a seasoned teacher, explaining how to hold the stone flat and throw it just right. Thomas's first few attempts plunked straight into the water, making Leo giggle, but with his grandson's guidance, he eventually managed to make a stone skip 3 times across the surface. "You did it!" Leo cheered, throwing his arms around Thomas's waist. As they stood by the water's edge, Thomas felt the weight of everything they'd been through. He knelt down to Leo's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Leo, I want you to know something," he said softly. "Family isn't just about being related by blood. It's about being there for each other, supporting each other, and loving each other no matter what. I promise you, I will always be here for you." Leo nodded solemnly, understanding in his own way the importance of the moment. "I know, Dad. You're the best daddy ever." Emily watched from the blanket, tears glistening in her eyes. When Thomas joined her later, while Leo was busy building a small rock tower by the water, she turned to him. "You've changed so much, Dad," she said. "The way you are with Leo, it's beautiful to watch. And the way you've worked to rebuild our relationship, it means everything to me." Thomas reached for his daughter's hand. "I spent too many years hiding behind my work, behind my principles. I forgot what really mattered. I'm just grateful it's not too late to make things right." They sat together on the blanket, watching Leo play by the water's edge. The afternoon sun painted the lake in shades of gold and orange, casting a warm glow over their little family. In that moment, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, Thomas felt a peace he'd never known before. The community center buzzed with quiet conversation as people gathered for the memorial event. Thomas had spent weeks organizing it, wanting to honor Rachel's memory in a way that would help Leo understand how many lives his mother had touched. Colorful flowers decorated the walls, and photographs of Rachel's bright smile were displayed on easels throughout the room. In the center, Emily's painting of Rachel took pride of place, a stunning portrait that captured not just her likeness but her warmth and kindness. Leo stood at the small podium, his blue tie slightly crooked despite Thomas's careful adjusting. His small hands gripped a piece of paper, but he barely glanced at it as he spoke. "My mommy was the best mommy ever," Leo began, his clear voice carrying across the hushed room. "She always knew how to make me feel better when I was sad, and she gave the best hugs in the whole world." Tissues rustled throughout the audience as Leo continued. "She told me that love is like a star. Even when you can't see it, it's still there shining bright. And now she's my special star watching over me and Daddy and Emily." Thomas felt tears well up in his eyes as he watched his son speak. He thought about how Rachel had changed everything, how her appearance in his life had cracked open his carefully constructed walls and taught him what it truly meant to love unconditionally. Emily stepped forward to unveil her painting, and a collective gasp filled the room. She had captured Rachel in a moment of joy, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes sparkling with life. The portrait seemed to glow with an inner light that made several community members whisper in appreciation. After the speeches and shared memories, everyone gathered outside. Leo held a single white balloon, his small face serious with concentration. "I love you, Mommy," he said clearly, releasing the balloon into the clear blue sky. "I hope you're watching, Mom." The balloon drifted higher and higher until it was just a tiny speck against the vast expanse of blue. Thomas wrapped one arm around Leo and the other around Emily, holding his family close as they watched it disappear into the heavens. As autumn leaves painted the neighborhood in warm colors, the Langston household settled into a comfortable routine. Thomas, no longer wearing his judge's robes, found himself embracing the simple pleasures of family life. His decision to step down from the bench had raised eyebrows among his colleagues, but the joy in Leo's eyes each morning confirmed he'd made the right choice. "Dad, look what I made today." Leo burst through the door after school, waving a colorful painting of what appeared to be their family standing under a rainbow. His kindergarten teacher's gold star sticker gleamed in the corner. Thomas knelt down to examine the artwork, his heart swelling with pride. "This is wonderful, Leo. Tell me about your new friend here." He pointed to a small figure Leo had added beside himself. "That's Michael. He sits next to me in art class. He likes dinosaurs too." Leo's enthusiasm was contagious, and Thomas couldn't help but smile at how far his son had come from the uncertain little boy he'd first met in the courtroom. Emily, who had been setting up for their community art program in the local recreation center, arrived with arms full of supplies. "Someone's been busy creating masterpieces," she observed, admiring Leo's painting. The art program, named Rachel's Rainbow, had become their way of keeping Rachel's spirit alive while helping other children express themselves through art. Thomas spent his mornings volunteering at the legal aid clinic, offering guidance to families struggling with custody issues. He understood their fears and hopes in a way he never could have before Leo came into his life. In the afternoons, he would join Emily and Leo at the art center, sometimes attempting to paint alongside them, much to Leo's amusement. "Daddy, trees aren't purple," Leo would giggle, showing his father the proper way to mix colors. One evening, as Thomas helped Leo with his homework, Emily entered carrying a leather-bound sketchbook. "I've been working on this for a while," she said, handing it to her father. "It's sort of a family timeline." Thomas opened the book carefully, his breath catching as he saw the first page, a sketch of the courtroom where Leo had first called him Daddy. Each subsequent page captured moments of their journey: Leo's first night at Thomas's house, family dinners with Rachel, the memorial service, and countless small moments in between. "Emily, this is..." Thomas struggled to find words, touching the pages gently. "It's our story," Leo chimed in, climbing onto Thomas's lap to look at the pictures. "See, there's when we made the cookies that got all burnt." Emily sat beside them, pointing out details in each drawing. "I wanted to show how far we've come," she explained, watching her father's eyes grow misty. "How we became a real family." The sketchbook lay open on Thomas's lap, a visual testament to their journey from strangers to family. Leo traced the drawings with his small fingers, telling stories about each memory, while Emily and Thomas exchanged knowing glances, both grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Langstons' backyard as Thomas, Emily, and Leo gathered around the memorial garden. The flowers they had planted months ago in Rachel's memory had blossomed into a stunning array of colors. Pink roses, purple irises, and yellow daisies swayed gently in the breeze. "The garden looks beautiful today," Emily said, kneeling beside a patch of freshly turned soil. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket, smoothing it carefully. "I wrote something for Rachel that I'd like to share with you both." Leo settled cross-legged on the grass beside her while Thomas stood nearby, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "Dear Rachel," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "Your love continues to bloom in our lives, just like these flowers. You showed me what it means to be strong, to fight for family, and to love unconditionally. Through Leo, I see your kindness and creativity every day. Through Dad, I witnessed the transformation that your influence sparked in him." Thomas squeezed Leo's shoulder gently, feeling the truth of Emily's words deep in his heart. The stern judge he once was seemed like a distant memory now. "Because of you," Emily continued, "we've become the family we were always meant to be. Thank you for trusting us with Leo, for believing in Dad's capacity to change, and for showing me that it's never too late to heal old wounds." Leo stood up suddenly, clutching a small plant in his hands. "Can I put this one in for Mom?" he asked, holding up a bright yellow marigold. "Of course, buddy," Thomas replied, helping Leo dig a small hole. As they planted the flower together, Thomas felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected gifts life had given him. A son who filled his days with joy, a daughter who had found it in her heart to forgive him, and the memory of a woman who had changed them all. The three of them sat together on the garden bench, surrounded by the flowers and the peaceful evening air. Leo's laughter rang out as he pointed to a butterfly landing on his newly planted marigold, and Emily leaned her head against her father's shoulder. In this moment of perfect contentment, Thomas realized that their garden had become more than just a memorial. It was a living symbol of their family's journey, their healing, and their love for each other. The flowers swayed gently in the golden light of sunset, as if Rachel herself was sharing in their joy. If you enjoyed the story of Judge Thomas and Leo, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.